This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
Indianapolis 500 champion Danny Sullivan on this edition of Conversations. It is known as the spin and win, perhaps one of the more dramatic moments in motor racing. In the starring role, Danny Sullivan. It was the 1985 Indianapolis 500, and Danny Sullivan passed the legendary Mario Andretti for the lead when at over 200 miles per hour, Sullivan's car spins completely around. Amazingly, he saves it. That in and of itself is remarkable. But more impressive is that Sullivan would regroup and go on to win the race and have his likeness etched into history on the Borg Warner trophy. While best known for his IndyCar career, Sullivan has raced in other series, including Formula One and NASCAR. We welcome the 1985 Indianapolis 500 champion, Danny Sullivan, to Conversations. What a real pleasure to have you on board here.
Thanks. It's great to be down here.
Tell me how your racing career started.
Believe it or not, it was really a whim. I was working as a waiter in New York City, and a friend of the family came and said, "Look, your family's concerned about you. What are you going to do with your life? You know, no offense, but you don't want to be a waiter all your life." Right. And I said, I really wanted to go racing, and I knew nothing about it. I'd never been to a race. I hadn't seen him. I watched a few on TV, but I really had seen his books, pictures, and all that stuff growing up because his son and I were best friends. Right. And I just had this thing for driving, and I liked it. And really, it was a whim. And he said, "Man, I don't really want to help you." And I convinced him. So for my 21st birthday, he sent me to a driving school in England. Okay. With the caveat that if they said I had talent, that I could pursue a career. And Jim Russell, it was the Jim Russell School, said I was one of the best that had ever come through the school. I believe he told a lot of the students that so they'd come back. But it was good for me because it meant I didn't have to return to university and I could pursue a career.
What is it? What do you think you had? Just some sort of innate talent?
You know, you get asked a lot about what makes a successful race car driver. You know, look, some of it's hand speed or, I think it's focus. I think it's also understanding what the car is doing, where the track goes, where to be on the track, what the lines are. A lot of guys have coaches now. Right. I don't think that's something that you teach. I think it's something, now you can get advice, right, and they can help you on, I'm having trouble with this particular corner or something. But I think really it just comes from you look at something and say, hey, this looks like the way through it. Right. And the way a skier does who's doing slalom gates, it's right, just they pick out the line. And I think that's what makes it go. But I think mostly it's focus, and it's being able to shut off everything around you and just stay in the moment. Because you've seen, especially in Indianapolis, the start line, before the race, there's 20,000 people on the start line, and everybody's your buddy and shaking hands, right, and pictures and all that. And you have to just kind of be able to shut that out, put the helmet on, and get down to business.
What's that first lap at Indianapolis like? That first lap of the Indy 500 like?
In some ways, it's scary in that, first of all, in the old days, you hadn't driven since Thursday. Now it's Friday. So you haven't driven a car, and all of a sudden you fire it up, and you go down on a couple of warm-up laps, green flag comes out, and you're racing, and it's not like you've gotten warmed up for anything or done a couple laps to get in the groove. And but you're worried a lot about the other people or the tires being a little cold, and just aggressive first lap when there's 200 to go and 500 miles. So you just want to kind of be cautious. So that's where, fear is the wrong word, but that's where trepidation kind of comes in. And I think the big thing is like, can I get through the first lap without getting tangled up with somebody else or making a mistake myself?
You said fear or trepidation, and I know particularly people who aren't all that familiar with the racing business would probably want to know the answer to this. Are you scared when you're driving the race car?
No, I never. I mean, what is scared? I mean, if even let's take the spin for example. Right. I wasn't scared. I was so angry that I'd just gotten into the lead of the Indianapolis 500, and now I'm going to hit the wall.
Right.
So I was just like, oh, well, I can't say, but I mean, but my point is, but I wasn't afraid of the impact. I wasn't afraid. You don't think about. Nobody wants to get hurt.
Right.
Every one of us know that that's a real possibility.
Right.
But you don't go out and do it. If you have that in your mind, you're done. You're too slow. That doesn't mean that we're not conscious of it and we're not just completely oblivious to that it can happen. But scared's not really something that comes into it. Sometimes if your car's not very good and you think, that was scary,
Yeah.
That moment, or the car's not working really good and you're trying to do something. But that's the difference too. If you're running at the front, usually your car's pretty good,
Right.
and so you're just trying to find a way to win. Believe it or not, the guys at the back are usually the more holding on because their car's not balanced very well. They've got a problem, not just a mechanical problem, could be a handling problem, and then they're like, oh boy, I'm just fighting to stay off the fence.
It's going to be a long day.
A long day.
Yeah. Let's talk about the spin and win. So it's 1985. You're more than halfway through the Indy 500. You pass Mario Andretti, and you take it from there.
Well, I have to back up a little bit,
Okay.
because a lot of people say, well, why'd you pass him into turn 1 and not into turn 3? Mario and I had been racing for a couple laps, and previously I was almost a lap down to him, and the car wasn't handling great. And Derek Walker, who was my radio and team manager for Penske, called and said, and stopped us out of sync to fix the car. And when I came back out, the car was magic. It's not much. You can only maybe a wing adjustment, a tire pressure adjustment, something small. And the car was magic, and I just came storming back, and I caught Mario. But we were pretty equal, except in 1 and 2 we were about the same. So I didn't have enough down the back straightaway. But in 3 and 4, I was a little bit quicker. So I had more of a runoff coming off of 4 into turn 1.
Gotcha.
And, Mario, if you look at the tape from different angles, he moved over and then kind of goes back up to the wall. He moved over quite far. That's part of the program. That wasn't anything surprising. He was like, if you're going to pass me, you're going to have to pass me. And when we went into 1, he just kind of came down, he's taking the line there. And even though I was right alongside of him, and they had the apron, which they don't have anymore. And I went down on the apron because, I felt Mario coming down. And when I came back up in front of him, there's a little bit of an angle change. They paint it sounds silly, but they paint the white line almost every night. If somebody spun in it or marks to keep it white.
Right.
So it's got a little bit of buildup, and then you run just a little bit stiffer right side spring and a little bit more stagger on the right side. So when the car got tripped, it just moved a little bit like that. I tried to correct it, and the front started to bite, which was going to turn me nose first into the wall. And so I just turned it back and spun, and like I said before, I was angry, so I just jumped on the brakes, thinking I'm gonna hit the fence, and the smoke cleared, and I was looking at the turn 2 sweeps, so I took my foot off the brake. Now the problem was I've got 3 speed up gears to kind of get going out of the pits, and then 2 top gears. And one was about 250 RPM apart. Everybody did it. One to save fuel, and one if you were racing somebody a little bit more RPM. So what gear do I take to jumpstart the engine? Because it's dead. We know, it's not like we know how fast we're going or what. Right. And to this day, I don't even really remember what gear I took, because if I go too low, I could snap it sideways again, and if I went too high, it could do like that.
Right.
I think I went with 4th gear. And you see at the end of the tape in turn 2, the car actually does that again. I almost lost it again.
Wow. And
I radioed to Derek Walker, because it was the last non-live broadcast of the Indianapolis 500. The next year they went live. Okay. So it was tape delayed. So they didn't have all the cameras in the pits. They didn't have all the monitors in the pits showing the race. And Derek didn't know what it was. So I came on the radio. I said, Derek, the yellow's for me. The yellow's for me. Everything's okay, but I need new tires. And he said I was normal except a couple octaves higher than I normally was. And I came in and pitted, and I lost some ground to Mario, but that was it. And as it took me a minute or so to explain all that, that's how fast it's playing in my mind. While that's the kind of speed and the pace at what you're thinking.
Right.
But of course it took a couple seconds at most to do all that stuff. And
so you go in the pits, you get 4 new tires.
And then later in the race, I was closing on Mario again, and Tom Sneva and Howdy Holmes were going into the corner, and I thought, into turn 1, I thought, Howdy's late in the race is not always, sharp or, paying attention. This is just stuff you learn about drivers, and he may say the same thing about me. So, and Howdy's a friend, so it's not, I'm not picking on him, but I just thought I rolled out of the throttle, and he and Sneva touched and spun. And normally on an oval, when a car spins, it goes up to the wall most of the time, or sometimes it'll go down. Right. And Sneva spun right down the line, and I'm going just at him. Of course, you can't jump on the brakes or you'll spin yourself. And I'm going right at him, and right before I got to him, he just slid up and hit the fence. And I thought, boy, I'm having some luck today, aren't I? And then I caught Mario in the same place and passed him later in the race. To be honest with you, I don't even know what lap, but I kind of moved. I held my position a little bit more this time. He was going to do the same thing.
What does it do for your career to win the Indianapolis 500?
Well, to be honest, I probably wouldn't be sitting here talking if I hadn't done the Indianapolis 500. Could have had a great career, but it's just that, it's that title that goes with it. It's whether it's Super Bowl champion, World Series champion, whatever, Kentucky Derby winner, NBA champion. It's just that title that just gives you a little bit more.
Yeah. Who was the toughest guy you ever raced against?
Mario's one of the toughest. I mean, he's a hell of a competitor. Very tough, a lot of experience, knows all the tricks and stuff like that. But he's also one of those guys that you can race wheel to wheel with, and he's not gonna put you in the fence. Right. Some other people you can't say that, and a lot of it depends on the day and what the equipment setup is for them. If their car's working good, some guys, myself included, I'm a better racer if my car's working. I can do more with the car than not. But you remember that era. It was not just Mario, but Al Unser Sr., Al Unser Jr., Ray Hall, Mears, Emerson Fittipaldi, Lion Dyke. I'm leaving people out because it just goes on and on and on down through the thing. So every weekend, you better have your act together because they were all there knocking at the door. And if you were a little off, you could be way down the starting order. And remember, in our races, particularly, ovals are always fairly close, but even on a road course, the first 20 cars would be covered by a second.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about that. It's a very competitive field. You only have to be a little off,
right?
And 4 or 5 tenths, and you're way down.
Yeah. You drove for Roger Penske, and
Right.
of course he's a legendary car owner, terrific businessman. What was he like to work for?
Roger was one of the better owners, and the reason why is when Roger was doing sports cars himself in the 60s, he was arguably one of the best drivers in the world in his day.
Really?
Okay, in sports cars. But he didn't stay at it for very long at that level because he wanted to get into business and I just, whatever reasons he had. But when you drive for somebody that's been a driver, they understand from your position more than an owner who's just an owner.
Right.
They understand that it's not always you. That oftentimes it's equipment, sometimes just things happen, things break. But the other thing with Roger's, sort of reputation, his attention to detail. So if something broke, he was all over to find out why. He wasn't throwing blame around. He wanted to know, okay, why did it break, and how do we prevent that, and what are other pieces that potentially could break because of potentially the same problem. And that's for a racer. That's the boss you want, because
Right.
he's doing as much, if not more, than you are to find a way to win.
Yeah, and of course he's had so much success, not just in IndyCar, but in NASCAR. It's just across the board.
Everything he touches, but he has that, but he takes that same philosophy to everything that he does, including the businesses, and it's a successful formula, and he doesn't deviate from it much.
Yeah. Impressive track record. As you look at the young crop of drivers out there right now, who's top of mind for you?
Well, obviously right now Rossi just coming off of we're talking IndyCar.
IndyCar for now.
Rossi obviously strong right now. J.R. Hildebrand when he got with Penske, but there's a real crop in there. Will Power's always a threat. Pagenaud, Rahal. Scott Dixon. I mean, he's that goes without saying.
Right.
All the Ganassi stables, but it seems like the Andretti stables now come up a little bit on par with Penske and Ganassi. So I think that's. But there's guys, Bourdais, who's past champion and who dominated the sport for a long time, and his team seems to be, out there. So, but I think. A couple of young guys that have come over from Europe. The one great thing about the IndyCar Championship is you've got road courses, street courses, short ovals, and super speedways. And for me, it's one of the best championships out there because you can't be good at one discipline.
Right.
Okay. And so you need to be good across the board, as does the team. And they've gotten it where the cars are a little bit more user-friendly across all disciplines. Now they obviously change things, and the wings are different for for different disciplines. But all in all, the cars are pretty much the same. And but if you just happen to be a road course guy and you can't drive an oval, you're not going to win a championship, and vice versa. Right.
Let me ask you about Danica Patrick. She's going to finish her career at the 2018 Indianapolis 500. She had some success in Indy, had a little bit more of a challenge in the NASCAR business. What are your thoughts on women being in the sport? And you think we'll see one that comes along that is just consistently competitive?
I followed Danica a lot. Because she went overseas. She was in England for a while racing, and then came back over here, and we looked at her for the Red Bull Driver Search program. And she's obviously talented. She's a great marketer. She's good looking. So that all helps. I don't see any reason why a woman is not successful in racing. I mean, Janet Guthrie had her moments back in the day, and Davina Galica, who you don't remember, maybe an English gal, but she was on the British ski team, so she was physically very, very fit, very strong. So it wasn't a physical side to it. But I don't know. There's nothing that I can see that holds them back from being successful. Certainly Danica had all the equipment and was, with Stewart-Haas Racing, and was, fantastic, and had some results. Sat on a pole at Daytona, and had some success. Won an IndyCar race, and I think in Japan.
Japan it was.
And so she can pedal the car. I think the farewell tour, if you like, for the final race, I understand why she did it for Daytona and Indianapolis, but I also believe it's very hard. Even if you're only 1 year, just to step back in, because everybody's working more with their team. They're a little bit more in the groove. They've done a couple races. It's just they're a little sharper on that stuff. And she's been a while since IndyCar. So. Yeah.
Speaking of NASCAR for a second, now you did some time in NASCAR as well. What's the biggest difference? I mean, obviously the cars are different and things of that nature, but is that just a whole different world jumping from IndyCar to NASCAR? Whole different set of skills, I guess, is the question.
It is. In my time, I was a little bit before. I went down there in '94, I think it was, and it was a little bit before they really wanted anybody to come over from the dark side,
Right.
if you like, from the Indy side. And I was a 500 champ and an IndyCar champ, and so forth. And so it was a little tough to get through scrutineering sometimes and get the equipment and so forth. Although Felix Sabates gave me dated equipment, but it was still good.
Mm-hmm.
I think the real thing is, you just like in any place, you got to go down and prove yourself, and you got to spend the time, and you got to move down and become a part of the the NASCAR fabric and be a part of the community down there, and so forth. And a lot of it's relationships. People that have come up through the ranks down there have developed relationships with younger crew members that now become part of a cup team crew, and they know each other. And that's a big factor, because those guys, they've got great racing, but you got to be on it all the time. Right. And they've got a lot of experience in that type of racing. We got less experience in our cars don't draft the way their cars do. We're not used to running, lap after lap after lap in a draft, maybe too wide. We've got a lot of drafting, particularly in the Indy cars now, but it's just a different kind of, it's a different discipline. Yeah. And look, the Cup drivers are fantastic. I mean, you can't take anything away from Kyle Busch, and how many races has Kyle won in both, over 100 in all three disciplines. Right. Jimmy Johnson, Jeff
Gordon, right.
all those guys. Immensely talented guys. But I think once you get in and you just start focus, it's hard to do, just to do that.
Yeah. You mentioned Jeff Gordon. I had read something that his stepfather, John Bickford, and anybody that follows racing obviously knows that name, kind of built his career and built his image and whatnot. And I read something that they sort of looked at you as a bit of a role model as they built Jeff Gordon's image.
As they've told me. I know Jeff and John very well. They told me that, and most of it, most of what they were talking about was the away from the track, right. Off, what I'm doing off the track, and it really started for me I was a guy looking for sponsorship, right. and couldn't get it, and so it was like, okay, how do I set myself apart from Jeff Gordon and Tony Stewart and all that? I had to make myself more marketable for the sponsor. So what the sponsor said, we want him because he gives us more exposure, more impressions, is more out there in the press, and so that's what I, kind of designed it around.
Because you had, appearances on the Miami Vice television show. I think you had an arcade game named after you. So you were pretty high profile in the day.
In the day, it was good, and Jeff took it to another level. Right. And all of that also is that media changed, right. Social media changed, exposure changed, TV changed. Right. We were just not as much on the air. Like I said, when I won Indy, it wasn't even a live broadcast. Right. Which really dates you, but it's just changed. Everything's evolved. Okay.
I have about 3 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing right now. You're working with Formula One, right? Tell me more.
So years ago, they realized that the stewards, that's the kind of judge and jury that sit at the track. So if something goes wrong, they'll make a decision if a driver did this or a team did this and so forth. And years ago, they realized that they had no driver in there putting it from a driver's perspective. So they started the driver's steward. So I'm one of 4 stewards that go to a number of Grand Prix. There's more than one driver steward. Right. But you had to have driven Formula One and World Championships points, which I did. And so I've started my deal. So I go to 4 to 5 Grand Prix a year. I just came back from a road trip. I did Bahrain and Shanghai. Okay. And I do about 4 or 5 Grand Prix. My next one's Monte Carlo.
Okay, well, wonderful. F1 is under new ownership now, John Malone, Liberty Media Group. Right. Do you, of course, they have the race in Austin, Texas. Do you expect them to try to infiltrate more into the U.S.?
I think they want to get here, but, one of the things about, to get the fans more following it, mm-hmm. we need an American in Formula One in a competitive capacity. Right. And, Rossi looked like he was going to, and he just never could get a break. And it's not always easy because there's, remember, there's only, 20 teams. So there's, So I mean, 20 seats, 10. So when you have that few seats, or 22 it is. I'm sorry, and 11 teams, and people don't move, there's not an opening. So if you peak at the wrong time, you don't have a gap to get in there. So it's not an easy nut to crack to get into Formula One.
A little bit of luck involved in it.
And we've got an American team, Gene Haas, who's the partner in Stewart Haas Racing, and they're doing very well for just being in it for a couple seasons, and they're doing tremendous.
Great. Be nice to see that come back to the U.S. even more. I mean, I know Austin's been a success, but it'd be nice to see maybe another race here in the U.S. In about 1 minute, besides the F1 commitments, what are you up to these days?
Just some business stuff in an aviation sector with some doing military contracts with a partner. We have a digital media business. Just getting back into the car dealership business, so we're soon to be announced some stuff. But so just busy and life, it's just good. And came to town for Kentucky Military Institute 50th class reunion. I'm not quite there at the 50th, but it's kind of an all class for a group. So this is a big one right here in Pensacola.
That's great. Danny Sullivan, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Jeff.
It was a real honor.
Likewise.
Danny Sullivan, he is the 1985 Indianapolis 500 championship, and of course he also won a kart championship, I believe, in 1988, right?
Correct.
So very successful on the IndyCar circuit. Also worked for a while with ESPN and ABC doing color commentary, so we appreciate him spending some time with us here today. By the way, you can see this show and many others online. All you have to do is go to WSRE.org/conversations. We're also on Facebook and on YouTube. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the broadcast. Take wonderful care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.
Support for this program is provided in part by Gulf Power, a Southern company, and by viewers like you. Thank you.